Hi, I'm Michelle Gullion, the archivist curator here at the National First Ladies Library. What I generally do in person is a curator series, Talk with a Curator. And we're going to do kind of a little bit of that virtually here. So we hope it turns out well and we hope you enjoy it. We're going to talk today about Ann Lowe. And Ann Lowe was born in 1898. In Alabama. She was very poor, but her grandmother and her mother were both seamstresses, so she came from a seamstress background, and she was a natural at sewing clothes, and she absolutely loved it. It was her passion. She became very creative with it. She would take the little scraps of paper that her grandmother and mother left on the floor, and she would make those into cloth flowers, and that actually became one of her signature looks that she had. She would make these beautiful flowers on clothing. She began to get so popular that a very well-to-do woman, Mrs. Lee in Tampa, Florida, asked her to come and work for her exclusively, and she did. And from that, though, she was too good to stay just for the Lees, even though they remained dear friends of hers throughout her life. She eventually became so well known and so popular in Tampa that she had to move to New York, because that was where the big money was. That was where she could really fulfill her dreams. And she was very, very successful. In the 1930s, she actually made the gown that Olivia de Havilland won in her Oscar, when she won her Oscar. And even though it was not credited to Ann Lowe, she made it, and there's beautiful leaves or flowers and things on that gown. And by the 1950s, she had her own business and was very much a high commodity for the high society, privileged women in the New York and area. She most famously made the debutante gown for some very famous Bouvier sisters, Lee and Jackie Kennedy, who became Mrs. Jackie Kennedy. And she actually also made Jackie Kennedy's wedding gown, and that's probably what she's best known for, was making Jackie Kennedy's 1953 wedding gown when she married Jack Kennedy. That was a very traumatic story for Ann Lowe. There was water that seeped into her basement, and she had to remake a bunch of the gowns, and it was a very hard time, and she ended up losing money. As Ann aged into the 60s, she began to have glaucoma, and it affected her eyes so much that she actually lost sight in one of her eyes. And I would really, if you're really at all interested in Ann Lowe's life, please, you can go online and read a little biography of her. There's just some wonderful things about her. She made beautiful, beautiful clothing. And one of the things she did, after she kind of, in the late 60s, she underwent some very financial hard times. She started making some of the Evyan Perfume gown collection. They were known as the Great Lady Collection. First, they were based off First Lady's gowns in the Smithsonian. And Ann made a second round of those. The first round of them were made by Barbara Karinska, and she's best known as the seamstress for the New York Ballet. But she made some of these little Evyan Perfume gowns. Who's Evyan Perfume? Well, Evyan Perfume back in the day was what women wore. They were the most popular perfume was called White Shoulders, and then the other one that these gowns were made for was called Great Lady, and that's what they were in tribute to. The whole thing about these little gowns they were to promote the Evyan Perfume Company's perfumes, And so these little collections of these gowns were sent all over the country, and even Hawaii, Alaska, even into a few of them were even in Canada. And they were put up in fine department stores, and women could come and see these beautiful gowns while they shopped for perfume. Ann Lowe made some of them, the collection, and we have quite a collection of them here ourselves. Today I'm going to show you a comparison between an Ann Lowe gown and a gown that we don't know who the maker is, but somebody who also made a beautiful gown, don't get me wrong, but Ann Lowe's, the quality, the detail is amazing. We'll start with the very top of the gown. And here we are. These gowns that we're looking at are Edith Roosevelt gowns. They're based off of her gown. Her gown was robin egg blue, and it had the lace top on it. And so these gowns are trying to bring those same kinds of elements as the one that's in the Smithsonian. This one here on what would be your left is a beautiful gown. It's made beautifully. It's older now, and you can see what happens with light in this gown. It's faded from the folds, and it is not an Ann Lowe gown, and we'll get into more of that later. Over here, this is the Ann Lowe gown, and the reason we know it's Ann Lowe, well, there's a label in it. Ann Lowe put her label in, even in these little gowns. The label for this gown is right there. There's the label. And you see, even her labels, Ann Lowe did fabulous work with her labels. It's just a really fancy, beautiful little label with a little lady in it. Even if this didn't have a label in it, there's subtle differences, big differences, and big subtle differences in this gown. We'll start here at the top of the bodice with the lace. If you look at the Ann Lowe gown, you'll see that you have actually you have a tulle layer, and on top of a lace layer, and you see here that the sleeve is lace. Beautiful, beautiful work. She just goes into all these tiny little details. Let's go over here to this gown. Again, it's beautiful, but if you see, it's harder to tell that there's two layers of on top here. You've got your tulle layer, and you've got your lace. It's a bigger print of lace. It's not as delicate, and also the sleeve is tulle as compared to the Ann Lowe gown, where she made this the sleeve also lace. If we look at the waist area here in these gowns, you'll see in the Ann Lowe gown how the little pleating is. It's just so, and it comes down and it makes the fabric flow nicely down the gown. And in the back, you also have these beautiful pleats. They make the gown flow nicely down the back. And on this gown, you can see that the pleating is not done as nicely. You don't have that nice little V that goes down. It still flows very nicely, but it deeply creases down here. You can see back here. It's similar, very similarly made, but you can just see the attention to detail. You don't see a little gap there. This is the back of the gown anyway. But Ann Lowe was all about perfection, no matter where it was being, what was being displayed. On the Ann Lowe gown, it's also neat to notice that the way that she has sewn this, it kind of makes, you can see here, it kind of makes the fabric itself kind of poofs out and gives it kind of a rich, lots of fabric material. And you see this beautiful lace underlay underneath that she put on. Just beautiful stitching that she does, very carefully done. If we look at this gown, you'll notice that it's not, doesn't have that, that nice little poof in how that they've sewn it. They've sewn it very straightforward. Again, it's very beautiful. But it's not like Ann Lowe. You also have this fine little fabulous little detail here in the back. But unlike the Ann Lowe gown, where if you look over here, you can see that, which is fun. It's beautiful. You can't see it in this gown just because of how the fabric is sewn and how it lays. The other thing that's most interesting about these gowns is the color. That's kind of a big giveaway. And it's not always, in a lot of these other gowns that we have of Ann Lowe's compared to others, it's not as obvious. You have to get into the really tiny detail. But with this gown, Ann's is a beautiful kind of gray blue. And that's much more in keeping with the color of Edith Roosevelt's gown in the Smithsonian, which was considered called a robin egg blue, where this is a brighter blue, as you can see, especially where it's not faded. It's much brighter. Even the brocade is bigger on this and not as delicate as what Ann Lowe has decided to do. And it makes it just that much more interesting and fun to compare. The other thing that's amazing to think about, these gowns, they're made so beautifully, but they were like up on the tops of store shelves. There was no need for them to be even this beautiful, but they were. And Ann Lowe, even though it was up high where no one could really look at it very closely, Ann Lowe was making sure to pay attention to that. Ann officially retired by the time in 1972, around that time. She had lost sight in one of her eyes, and she was also had cataracts in the other eye, and she was really legally blind. And it was very hard for her, but she eventually had to retire. And she died in Queens, New York in 1981. A large collection of Ann's works and of her gowns and dresses and all of her beautiful work is can be found at the National Museum of African American History and Culture in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. And you can also find little works of hers in places like Tampa, Florida, where she really got started at. And they're very proud of her in Tampa, Florida, too, as they should be. Thank you so much for being with me today, and I hope you enjoyed a virtual compare and contrast of Ann Lowe gowns. Thank you.